Hello, my name is Elizabeth Stegemoller, and I'm an associate professor in the Department of Kinesiology and the director of the Graduate Neuroscience program at Iowa State University. And today I'll be talking to you about music and Parkinson's disease. So I'm going to start with a brief overview of what Parkinson's disease is. You may already know some of this information, but it's always nice to review. So Parkinson's disease is caused by a loss of dopaminergic neurons in the basal ganglia. And so the black arrow here is pointing to the basal ganglia. And in particularly the area of loss is in the substantia nigra, which is circled here. And so you can see this is relatively deep within the brain. And this area has many connections with other parts of the brain, which is what makes Parkinson's disease a little bit more challenging and difficult to find a cure for. This loss of neurons in the substantia nigra is associated with our cardinal symptoms of Parkinson's disease, and this includes tremor, rigidity, bradykinesia, which is slowness of movement, gait disturbances, and postural instabilities. So not every person with Parkinson's disease has tremor, and just because you have tremor does not mean that you have Parkinson's disease. It could be some other disorder. Rigidity is typically in the more proximal areas. You see that in the neck and the hips. Bradykinesia, though, is the hallmark symptom of Parkinson's disease, the slowness of movement. And it's seen in most all individuals that are diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. And of course, the short shuffling gait and the postural instabilities, the forward stoop, which can lead to increased susceptibility for falls. However, these symptoms and the degeneration in the substantia nigra is just the tip of the iceberg. There's actually more degeneration that is occurring ahead of the degeneration in the substantia nigra, and these lead to other symptoms that may be not associated fully with Parkinson's disease at the beginning, but there is a lot of degeneration that's going on in other areas that can lead to other symptoms of Parkinson's disease. These other non-motor or other motor symptoms are symptoms that affect the quality of life, and unfortunately are some of the factors that lead to death in people with Parkinson's disease. For example, difficulty with speaking, excessive salivation, difficulty in swallowing, and respiratory problems. If you can't swallow appropriately, foreign material will seep into the lungs. And then you must have the strength to cough that foreign material out. Of course, all of it takes muscle activity and coordination, which is impaired in people with Parkinson's disease, and this, because they can't cough out that foreign material in their lungs, will lead to aspiration pneumonia, which is one of the leading causes of death. In addition, not all of the symptoms, including the cardinal symptoms, respond fully to our current medication or surgical treatment. And so there remains a need to find alternative treatments that have a pervasive effect on all symptoms of Parkinson's disease. And so in particularly in our lab, we believe that music may be one of those alternative treatments. So the next question then is, what is music therapy? Before we move into the next slide. So there's a little bit about Parkinson's disease review, and now what is music therapy? So how do you apply music as an alternative strategy? And so music therapy is a clinical profession, and the issue with music therapy is that we're not trying to make people with Parkinson's disease better musicians. We're actually using specific aspects of the music to help improve specific symptoms. So for example, on the slides on the side over here, this is from our music exercise and dance class, we'll use music such as, preferred music, songs that they know, but we'll ask them to move in time with the music. We can also use that to increase range of motion, timing of muscle activity. We can work on things through dance like coordination, moving backwards, moving forwards, moving to the side, posture. All of those things we can work on through music. The picture here in the middle is from our singing group, and I'll talk a little bit more about singing and specifically the research that has shown how singing is beneficial for people with Parkinson's disease. But again, we can use singing not necessarily to make them better singers, but things like posture, facial expression, respiratory control, and then we'll show even how it can have an effect on mood, socialization, and even swallow. So then why music? Why do I think music is important, and why do we think it would be a good strategy? So the first piece of evidence, I'm going to go through 4 particular principles that relate to neuroplasticity. So the first principle will be that music listening to preferred music increases activity in the ventral tegmentum area, as shown in this figure here. So when you listen to music that is more preferred than music that maybe is not, you see more activity in the VTA, and the ventral tegmentum area is a dopaminergic area. So by putting things together, the theory is that music, listening to preferred music, increases dopamine production in the brain. Now, this is not the same area that's impaired in people with Parkinson's disease, but that's okay. It's kind of like when you take a pill or your medication, you're not 100% certain that the medication is going to go to the area of the brain that you would like it to go to. So even if we can increase dopamine in other regions, it may, one, help the medication to work more effectively in other regions in which dopamine is depleted. Also, we know that the ventral tegmentum area also has connections to the motor cortex, which is great. But probably most importantly is that the ventral tegmentum area is involved in neuroplasticity. In order to make any new connections within the brain, you must have actually dopamine released to help form those new connections in the brain, primarily after the age of 3. The second principle is called the Hebbian principle, and we rely on neural synchrony, and that is that neurons that fire together wire together, or neurons out of sync do not link. And so, in other words, 2 neurons that are going to be making connection with each other must fire in time. And so the unique principle of music is rhythm. And we do know that behaviorally, people entrain and synchronize movement and heart rate and breath rate to music. And if we are synchronizing to the rhythm of those paired behaviors, we know that the neurons underlying those behaviors must also be synchronizing, which would assume that we were making new connections. The third principle is that music is a clear signal. So in order for the brain to process information and make new connections, we need a clear signal. It's not that our brain can't handle a noisy signal, but an impaired or a diseased brain may have more difficulty understanding noise and perceiving noise, which is in the bottom, which you can see is a lot of bumps and a lot of noise, versus music, which is a clear oscillating signal. And indeed, we've shown that music therapists and musicians have a clearer signal in their voice and also in their production of sound, so that possibly pairing information with music will be better understood than normal speech or other forms of communication. And then finally, music activates the entire brain. I'm not necessarily saying that this is activated all at the same time, but depending on how you're interacting with music, you can selectively activate or engage different parts of the brain. So if you're reading music, the back in the occipital lobe, right? If you're listening to music, the auditory cortex. If you're moving to music, obviously the motor areas. If you're actually playing music and you have the somatosensory area with touch, you have to also critically think and make decisions on when to come in, when not to come in. That would be the frontal lobe. All of this is often associated with strong memories and emotions for the limbic lobe. And of course, when you're doing all of this together and combining sensory information, visual, auditory, somatosensory, in order to produce a movement, the parietal lobe that integrates information is also engaged when making music or activating when engaging in music. So all of these factors together make music a unique, and music therapy a unique therapy to help enhance neuroplasticity in the brain and making new connections, which is good in therapeutic purposes because basically that's what we're trying to do, either make new connections or strengthen existing connections. So by increasing dopamine through listening to preferred music, the rhythm of music helps to promote neurosynchrony. It is a clear signal, which is easier for the brain to encode and understand. And the neat thing about music and music therapists is depending on the music therapists get trained or are trained and kind of intuitively know if this is the behavior that I need to change, then this is what I'm going to do with the music. Well, by doing that, you're actually targeting the specific area of the brain that is underlying that behavior that would need to be enhanced or improved. And so because we have access to the whole brain, that makes it a very unique therapy to target multiple symptoms of Parkinson's disease. So then what does this look like in practice? So in our lab, we actually merge our research that we do with our outreach. And so we base our research kind of on this fundamental theory about how music kind of engages neuroplasticity. And we have, I personally have 2 lines of research, one that looks at the effects of music on motor cortical activity, because it is a neurophysiology lab. And we also look at the effects of singing in Parkinson's disease. We also have other student-led research. I have about 25 to 30 undergrads in my lab and several graduate students, and they all run their own studies, usually working in groups, especially the undergrads. Then we have outreach groups. Weekly, we have singing, dance, boxing, and yoga. And right now, all of our outreach groups are online and available for anyone with Parkinson's disease, and there is no charge. But before the pandemic, we would meet in person, and our student volunteers were actively engaging with our participants with Parkinson's disease. And then we offer other yearly events for our Parkinson's community that are listed there. So we really engage with the community, and that information actually often directly informs the research that we do. So today I'm going to talk to you about one specific line of research in singing. And you may ask, well, why singing? What's so important about that? Before I started in this field or in this line of research, there were very few articles on the effects of singing in Parkinson's disease, but there were a ton of people and a ton of groups across the world that were singing together.
Simple to
So there are groups all around the world and all over the US that are actively singing, and many of them are singing online now. In fact, we just finished a virtual PD choir video with 170 people from the Parkinson's community participating in that virtual choir. So it is a big deal for the Parkinson's community, but there was very little research. And so one of the first studies that we did was to look at the effects of singing on swallow, respiratory control, and the voice. And so we ran an 8-week program, intervention program. We were able to recruit 30 participants from across Iowa, and they were within 4 singing groups. Interventions were led by the music therapists. So I'm a board certified music therapist, and for the intervention, I trained 3 other music therapists to follow the exact same intervention protocol. And that included both vocal exercises and group singing. And all of these were designed to target specific symptoms of Parkinson's disease, like improving respiratory control, posture, facial expression. You'll see in the video here in a minute, eyebrows raised, and a slew of other things like vocal range. They target specific vocal range. So you'll hear in the song, the vocal range is over an octave that they're having to sing in. We also target enunciation or articulation. So the song Mersey Dotes and Dozy Dotes works on articulation, which you'll see in the song as well. And then finally, with breath support throughout the song of when to breathe, when not to breathe, and that actually targets respiratory control.
Mersey Dotes and Dozy Dotes and little Lampsy Ivy and Italy Ivy too, what they do. Mersey Dotes and Dozy Dotes and little Lampsy Ivy and Italy Ivy too, what they do.
And you'll notice that they don't use music, and that's intentional because as soon as you put a piece of music in someone's hand, they tend to look down and the posture goes away. But also, this is another way to work on memory, in particular working memory, which is also a symptom or an area of need in people with Parkinson's disease. So our major outcome measures for voice were vocal duration, how long they could hold a sound, how loud they can make a sound, and the pitch range, so how low and how high they could go. We also measured maximum inspiratory and expiratory pressure with the spirometer, which is shown here. So how forcefully they can breathe in, how forcefully they could breathe out. And then for swallow, we used EMG electrodes that look like this, and placed them over the swallow muscles, which I'll show a picture of in a little bit. And we looked at muscle timing and amplitude during swallow. We also collected 3 quality of life measures of voice-related quality of life, swallow-related quality of life, and whole health quality of life scales. So our statistics, or what we did is we measured differences between a high dose and a low dose group. So we had a group that met twice a week, and we had groups that met once a week. And then we also looked at the differences between pre and post intervention. So to start with, in all of these figures for this study, there were no differences between our low and high dose group. There were only main effects of pre to post intervention. So I'm starting with the respiratory measures. Asterisks indicate significance less than 0.05. We have maximum inspiratory pressure and expiratory pressure on the bottom. The orange is the high dose group, and the blue bars are the low dose group, and it shows the difference from beginning pre to post. And in both of these measures, significantly improved after 8 weeks of singing. For our quality of life measures, we saw significance in the voice-related quality of life and the whole health-related quality of life from pre to post intervention, but not the swallow. And finally, our vocal measures, or our voice outcome measures, the vocal loudness and pitch range did improve, but did not reach significance. vocal duration did reach significance. And even though things didn't reach significance, but they improved, we still consider a win for our study because Parkinson's disease is a progressive neurological disease. So over 8 weeks, the fact that anything improved is actually a win. So then what about the swallow? So this is the picture of where our EMG electrodes were placed right on the submental and laryngeal muscle groups. And we had participants complete 3 swallows of thin liquid, which was water, 10 milliliters of water, and thick swallows, which is 10 milliliters of pudding. And this is a little bit of what our EMG trace looks like in our specific outcome measures of interest. Included rise time, which is from onset of EMG activity to the peak. Fall time is from the peak to the offset of EMG activity. Of course, duration is the combination of those two. We also looked at peak amplitude here and the area under the curve. And here's an example of one person with Parkinson's disease. It's easier to see than to put the entire group data up. And so I'll kind of run you through what this is. So the laryngeal thin is this, on this column is a thin liquid swallow from the muscle activity from the laryngeal muscle group, and this is a thick swallow on this column over here. On the top is before singing, and on the bottom is post. And what you can see is that the EMG activity is actually longer. It's spread out from after singing. And so what does this mean? Significantly, we found that rise time, fall time, and EMG duration were significantly increased, but there were no significant differences in EMG amplitude or area under the curve. So in other words, the timing of the muscle, that it was on for a longer period of time, turned on and stayed on. But there wasn't any difference in amplitude, which is a measure of force. So the force didn't go up, it didn't go down, but it stayed on longer. And so what could that functionally mean? We hypothesize that this means that the larynx is elevated for a longer period. And for swallow, that is actually good. We want the airway to stay closed for the entire duration of the swallow. And so to further summarize, we believe that singing may protect against potential complications from swallow. So not only are we holding the larynx up longer, but we're also improving the respiratory control so that if anything were to seep down, they would be able to cough that material up because they have stronger or more ability to expel maximum expiratory pressure to get those foreign materials out. And indeed, a colleague of mine recently, hopefully the research will come out soon, but looked at cough in those that sing, and indeed coughing, how you could measure cough, was actually better in after a singing intervention as well. So taking all of that together, we really feel that singing has the potential to protect against swallow complications and protect against one of the leading causes of death in PD, which is pretty cool. So we kind of wanted to know what were the underlying mechanisms, and this data is actually just clearly pilot data. We are on hold until we can do further collections, but we used transcranial magnetic stimulation, which you can kind of see here is a figure-8 coil, and then we can stimulate the motor cortical regions that are that stimulate the same muscles as we do in swallow, and then we can look at the timing and amplitude of that muscle activation after we stimulate it. We were able to collect in 2 persons with Parkinson's disease who have been singing for at least 1 year and 1 participant that does not. And so the take-home message here is that the black is the non-singer, okay? So the 1 non-singer, and the gray are the 2 singers. And so if you think about swallow, you want both sides to be activated at the same time and then roughly the same amplitude, right? And what we're seeing here is that that's the case for the singers. But for the non-singer, we see this unilateral activation, which is part of the symptomology of Parkinson's disease, that it starts on one side and then leads to the other side. So this person is showing an asymmetric activation of the muscle groups associated with swallow. And so we believe that this may suggest that the singing helps to improve the control of those muscles and making them more bilateral, which may be why we see an increase in time, or the increase in the length of time the muscle activity is on. But again, this is just really a few, only 3 participants, but it's still fun to show, and we hope that we can pick this up once we can continue to do work in the lab with human subjects after the pandemic. So, like I said, we really engage with the community, and the community, Parkinson's community, often informs a lot of what we do. And so participants also, we did a qualitative study and asked them what they thought about the Parkinson's singing group. Participants reported that they felt less stressed and that they could move better after singing. In fact, Jackie here would tell us that she would plan her activities for the day to happen after singing, because like going to the grocery store or outings such as that, because she felt so much better and could move better after singing. And so we are currently finishing up a second funded study to look at the motor symptoms, stress, inflammation after 1 hour acute session of singing. So just 1 hour, what happens? For our movement symptoms, we did the UPDRS, which is things like this and gait and posture. So all those cardinal symptoms basically are what these movement disorder specialists are looking at. The movement disorder specialists were masked to the study. They did not know that it was a singing study, and they didn't know if they were looking at pre to post. And so our superior participant was actually Jackie, and she dropped in her score by 12 to 11 points respectively. Both 2 movement disorder specialists indicated a 12 to 11 point drop, which is phenomenal, because all she was doing was sitting and singing. She wasn't exercising, she wasn't moving, she was sitting and singing. And medication, the clinical meaning difference for medication is a 4-point drop. So we're looking at, in the case of Jackie, 3 times what she may get from her medication. And she was on her medication as well, but this was in the afternoon, so we're pretty certain that it wasn't a medication effect. It was about 3 hours after she had taken her last dose of medication. But that's not the case for everyone. So we consider some people are responders and some people are non-responders. And so the non-responders did have a real significant drop. Our non-responders kind of went up, but not as much. And so when we were to average all that together, we lose any significance, which would suggest that we are underpowered for this study. But it also leads us to kind of start thinking about what the next steps are in the research. So right now, we're looking at cortisol, the measures that we collected from our blood sample. We collected a blood draw right before and right after singing, and a spit sample right before and right after this 1 hour singing. And we're looking at those measures of stress that we can isolate from those samples, inflammation, and even oxytocin, which is bonding, to see if these are changing and if those are associated in any way with the changes, that behavioral changes in the motor UPDRS. And we're currently looking at that data. But it also leads me to wonder about the type of session. So is this, and the engagement. So is everyone actually actively engaging? Sometimes people with Parkinson's disease fall asleep, or they're not as actively engaged in the activity. Does their improvement in motor UPDRS have to deal with how engaged they are? Is it because of the preference? Do they like the music that we're using in the session, right? Because that's part of the theory, is that it needs to be preferred music to increase dopamine production. And is it because, the content, maybe we use more vocal exercises one day than we do another day over group singing, or maybe we're learning new music. And so maybe all of those things that are included in the session dictate how well if they have any of these improvements in motor symptoms. And so we have several grants in right now to look at optimizing the singing session, using all of our outcome measures that we've used in the past as ways to look at how we can optimize the session. And we're also completing qualitative interviews of all of those participants that are singing all over the country and the world to get an idea of what aspects of the singing group seem to be most beneficial to them. And hopefully by putting all that information together, we can truly optimize our singing intervention and then move that forward into a clinical trial. So I'd like just to say a moment of thanks to all of my collaborators and the funding for all of the projects in the lab. And if you have any questions, you can contact me. My email is there, or you can also look us up on our lab website, which is also there at the bottom of the page. Thank you very much.